Today, I'm pleased to announce an additional investment of $28 million to bolster the Canada Border Services Agency's ability to detect and search containers with stolen vehicles. The agency will explore new detection technology solutions and the use of advanced analytical tools such as artificial intelligence.
Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc there just this past hour preempting tomorrow's summit on auto thefts, announcing $28 million for the Canada Border Services Agency to respond to surging auto thefts. It's an issue that's been declared a crisis by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which says 200 vehicles are stolen every day. As an example, Canada's biggest city, Toronto, saw 9,600 vehicle thefts in 2022, a more than 300% jump from 2015. We've got MPs here in studio live to dig into the federal response. Liberal Parliamentary Secretary to the Public Safety Minister, Jennifer O'Connell, is with us, as is Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer and NDP House Leader Peter Julian. Hello to all of you. Nice to see you tonight. I appreciate it. Ms. O'Connell, I'll start with you. I'm hoping you can provide some more specifics about what the $28 million the minister just announced will actually do. I heard him talk in broad strokes about the potential for better inspection of containers and technology. Does that mean more X-ray machines? Does it mean more people at the Port of Montreal to do those inspections?
Well, it's building on both of those things, frankly. It's talking about and investing in more people and specialized investigators, which is incredibly important. But it's also looking at technology, things like even AI. And part of the conversations that we're hoping to have tomorrow at the summit is looking at not just scanners, but additional technology that can be used. And that's what this funding is going to help provide, is expertise and options that could be available to help us.
So just to follow up, I'm a little bit confused because earlier this week, the Conservatives made a similar proposal. And this morning, for example, the Transport Minister, Pablo Rodriguez, dismissed it out of hand and said the point is to do the opposite of what Poilievre is doing, to say, I have all the solutions without consulting anyone. So without talking to the police or others ahead of the summit, he said, I know how to fix everything, which is not true. That's why all the experts will be there tomorrow and work on solutions. He seemed to dismiss the idea of putting forward a solution ahead of the summit, but that's exactly what you just did, that your government did this hour.
This was part of the CBSA portion. We're prepared to do more, and based on those conversations that are going to happen tomorrow. But
were you pushed, just to be clear, were you pushed to do this because the opposition was calling you to? Because
Absolutely.
you made no indication. In fact, you dismissed the idea of making an announcement ahead of the summit this whole week.
What we've pushed against is Pierre Poilievre thinking he has all the answers and standing in front of a fence saying that technology is the only solution. What we need to do is actually restore some of the cuts that the Conservatives had made previously. These cuts have consequences, which Canadians are now feeling. And so this funding announcement today is to specifically deal with CBSA, like I said, intelligence, additional technology, but there is that conversation that still needs to happen tomorrow with industry leaders, local police, provinces, municipalities, territories. So it is ongoing. This is just one piece dealing with the specialized needs at CBSA.
Mr. Scheer, the Conservatives, when they were in government in 2012, did cut $143 million. The union at the time said that equated to 1,100 jobs from the CBSA. In hindsight, given what's happened with auto thefts, was that a mistake?
It's just not true. There were 12,000 CBSA officials at the beginning of the previous Conservative government. There's about 14,000 at the end of it. In fact, after the first year of Justin Trudeau's government, they cut it down to about 13,000 from that 14,000. So the cuts have come from the Liberals in terms of the frontline services. What they have increased a lot of spending on is high-priced consultants that pad contracts. We're dealing with several scandals right now in the public safety envelope where there were no-show jobs and padded invoices. That's where they've increased spending. But crime waves aren't like heat waves. They don't just happen because that's the way Mother Nature works. This crime wave is caused by Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau weakened penalties for repeat offenders. He brought in house arrest and easy bail, and as a result, crime has skyrocketed. Our common sense plan, which the Liberals just voted against just a few minutes ago, would bring back tougher penalties by having 3-year mandatory jail time for anyone convicted of stealing a third car. I'm not sure why Liberals are opposed to that. We also proposed ending that house arrest for repeat offenders and the easy bail. And we've also strengthened we've proposed increasing the amount of scanners that we have at ports. Fewer than 1% of containers are inspected at federally run ports. We don't think that's a good idea. We know that this can be ended by reversing the policies that Justin Trudeau brought in 8 years ago. 8 years ago, we weren't dealing with this kind of car theft wave plaguing our cities.
A couple of things to unpack there. It sounds like the government is announcing money to go towards the technology that you're talking about to improve the scanning and the detection of cargo that comes out of the Port of Montreal. On the second point, on your dismissal of the fact that the Conservatives did cut, I mean, it was very clear in the 2012 budget that there would be $143 million cut over 3 years of the $1.7 billion budget of the CBSA. That is a fact. That did happen.
You know, I love it when Liberals and many of their friends in the media try to say that if you don't do government expensively, you must be cutting. We increased, as I just said, we increased the number of CBSA officials from about 12,000 when we first formed government back in 2006 to 14,000. That's an increase. Where we do find efficiencies is when we see government waste. So when government is wasting, when this Liberal government is wasting tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on high-priced consultants.
So were the increases on consultants under the Harper government also a waste of money? Because that also increased substantially.
We can find lots of savings from Liberal waste without affecting frontline resources. I should point out, too, that this Liberal government let about $117 million lapse in their latest budgetary cycle. So there's lots of areas here where we can increase frontline services. I'm just pointing out that they can't have it both ways. You know, they can't hurl these kinds of accusations while at the same time they're guilty of the very same things that they're accusing us. And I should just point out that when our leader Pierre Poilievre announced this policy, he talked about the dollar for dollar. When we introduce a new dollar of spending, we're going to find a corresponding savings. We're going to increase the amount of scanners and officials running those scanners by cutting that waste on consultants.
Yeah, I have questions about consulting and how you're sure that that's all wasteful spending in a moment, but I want to bring in the NDP. I looked through your last election platform, Mr. Julian, very specifically to see what it said about organized crime, because I heard one of your MPs recently call on the federal government to increase resources to deal with the border. But this is also a problem about organized crime, according to many of the experts we've interviewed over the last number of weeks on the subject. It's about the border and it's about organized crime. The police are asking for more resources to deal with that. The only thing I could find in your platform about that was that you wanted to review the RCMP's budget to ensure accountability of it to the public. You didn't see anything about, for example, more resources to attack problems like this one, upping the resources for police forces more generally. Are you supportive of that?
We actually tried to amend the Conservative motion this week, and the Conservatives refused. And what that included was resources to fight organized crime, to fight money laundering, because that what we're seeing is increasingly these organized crime syndicates using money laundering, and in Canada has not responded. The NDP put forward a number of years ago, beneficial ownership registry that would stop people from being able to hide behind numbered companies, and both Conservatives and Liberals said no to that. We also believe that we need to restore the funding from the Harper government days when they slashed crime prevention funding, because crime prevention funding is very effective. $1 spent on crime prevention saves $6 in terms of policing and court costs and prison costs.
Haven't there been 8 years to restore that funding already?
No, what we've seen, the Conservatives slashed it, as they did slash the CBSA, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And there hasn't been the restoring of the crime prevention centres across the country that were doing such effective work. We also believe that automobile CEOs should be held accountable for the fact that often the security devices for automobiles are insufficient, even though we're talking about people paying.
What do you mean hold them accountable? You think this is a corporate problem right now, not a criminal one?
That's something that was part of our motion. And Conservatives said no to that as well. And so what we laid out was a comprehensive adult plan, not something that's written on the back of a napkin. One thing I would like to say about CBSA, the Conservatives did slash, as you pointed out, 1,100 positions. We know now that CBSA is still about 800 officers short on the border, even to do the existing accountability around stopping crime syndicates. And the money that was announced this week is only a drop in the bucket of what is actually needed to enhance the border safety
you support a government, you support the party that has not restored that funding that you're blaming the Conservatives for, right? Like, they've had 8 years to make up for the damage that you say was caused under the Harper government, and they haven't.
And that's why we continue to push in this minority parliament. And if the Conservatives had been willing to adopt our motion, it's something that would have passed Parliament to restore the cuts in funding that the Conservatives did and that the Liberals have not made up for.
I just have time for one quick comment from each of you. Ms. O'Connell, I do want to ask about timing for all of this, because this is not new that this problem has surfaced. It primarily became particularly punctuated back in 2022. We had lots of data last year to show us that, for example, in Ontario and Quebec, auto thefts rose by 50%, 9,600 vehicles stolen in Toronto. We knew at that point it was a 300% increase from 2015. Why is your government only now addressing the issue?
Well, it's not new for us either, and we actually have been addressing this issue with some of
Then why has it
the
gotten
funding.
worse?
Well, because again, cuts have consequences, and we've had to restore the loss of expertise, the loss of specialty. I remember one of my first budgets on the Finance Committee, we heard from Public Safety talking about the cuts that the Conservatives made isn't just personnel, but it's a specialized task force and intelligence to deal with some of this. So we have been working on it. What's interesting is the Conservatives, this is the first week that they're starting to talk about it. After we announced the Auto Summit, they referred to police and industry makers as bigwigs.
I'll make the same point as I did to the NDP. I understand the criticism 8 years ago of cuts, but you've had 8 years to restore them. Why haven't you, if you thought it was such a priority?
We have restored the over 1,000 employees that were cut from the Conservatives, and in addition to that, added an additional 800 boots on the ground to deal with this. And today's announcement is another piece of that foundation. And after the summit, working with partners, we're prepared to do more and work.
But why has the problem gotten worse?
Well, because again, we continue to need to have those specialized units. We need to invest in technology, and this takes time and work. And what happens at committee when we're actually trying to move forward on some of these pieces and legislation, my colleague, Mr. Julian, talked about money laundering, is the Conservatives filibuster and don't allow legislation to move forward. They don't allow these very real issues to actually be addressed. So we're pushing through all of that. But when the Conservatives sit up here talking like, they're going to address the issue, all they do is come up with slogans and then actually block the business of the House to allow more of these measures to work through.
Mr. Scheer, do you concede that your colleagues may have a point in that there might be new information learned from law enforcement agencies tomorrow, from other levels of government, that can further add to the depth of solutions that are put forward?
They're just wrong, though. There were 12,000 Border Service Agency officials when we formed government. There was 14,000 when Justin Trudeau took over. Some other numbers for you. Under the previous Conservative government, car thefts went down by 50%. Under Justin Trudeau, they've gone up by 34% nationally, including 100% in Montreal. And the government's own press release acknowledged 300% in Toronto. That is a direct result of when you give dangerous and repeat offenders house arrest and same-day service for bail.
Do you have any proof of how many repeat car offenders have been serving just house arrest? Do you have any evidence to back that up?
I can introduce you to police officials who have told us that the same dozen or so people commit thousands of crimes in a year. Sometimes they steal a car in the morning and are back out on the streets and steal another one in the afternoon. That is a direct result of the Liberals' catch and release soft on crime policies. And I would challenge my Liberal colleagues to say, what is wrong? Explain to me what is wrong with having a mandatory sentence of 3 years for someone who's convicted of stealing a third car. What is wrong with that?
Well, my understanding was you also were proposing an
ending
amendment
house
to the
arrest?
criminal code, for example, that already exists around using the involvement of organized crime as an aggravating factor.
Toughening up and tightening up the language on that to make sure it has more teeth, and bringing back and increasing the mandatory sentence from 6 months to 3 years. Those are things that, when you look at the Liberals' signature policies in the first few years of Justin Trudeau's mandate, he removed mandatory jail times, he brought in easy bail, and as a result, crime has exploded. It didn't used to be this way. I think we can all acknowledge
the court informed the decision around bail. It's a simplified way of saying easy bail.
No. There was a legislative change. There was a legislative change that went beyond anything. It went beyond anything that came out of any court court decision. This is Justin Trudeau's ideology. He believes in this. He believes in putting the rights of victims, the rights of criminals ahead of the rights of victims. And as a result, we've seen crime
that's
go up.
ignoring the court's
ago,
decision. With all due respect, Mr. Scheer, that's ignoring the court's
No, no, no.
decision that there had to be taken into account on balance the disproportionate representation of minorities in jails.
He went far beyond that. He went far beyond. He is ideologically
And they have recognized
committed.
that the impact of that was too far. I'm not saying that you're wrong in that respect, but to say it's all because Justin Trudeau wants criminals on the street, that's kind of misrepresenting.
But he has absolutely brought in a bail regime that prioritizes the rights of criminals, and not just first-time suspected young people maybe making a mistake in their life. We're talking about people with long criminal records with a high degree of probability of re-offending. And instead, he's going to hold a summit. And he's going to talk about spending more money. The numbers don't lie. 8 years ago, this was not the problem that it is today. Conservatives brought car thefts down. Justin Trudeau has brought them up. That is a fact.
Okay, I'm already way long. Last word to you, Mr. Julian, and I wanted to ask you, is it so unreasonable to think about the deterrent system here and the penalties that these kinds of criminals face? Is it not? Why are you dismissing it and the government out of hand?
What we're doing is saying we need policies that work. That's why we put forward the motion to fight organized crime, to fight money laundering. These are international crime syndicates that are taking cars that are stolen in Eastern Canada and shipping them overseas.
There are repeat auto thieves involved too.
And the reality is that if you want to crack down on that crime, you have to make sure that you have a sufficient number of border officers to do the inspections, to do that kind of important surveillance that stops those exports from happening and those crime syndicates from benefiting.
Proposed.
No, well, after slashing 1,100 positions. So they slashed all the CBSA positions, and now they have a motion. They had a motion this week that called for, well, let's restore the mistakes that we made. The Conservatives
it's been 8 years. Again, it's been 8 years. I take your point.
It's certainly not the approach that I think any reasonable person would take.
But
I don't
on
know
the
why
face of it,
so
they're
frightened of
proposing more
organized crime.
CBSA. Why wouldn't you support that?
We absolutely have been calling for it for years. We've been calling for those 800 positions to be restored. The government has put in a drop in the bucket. But my point is this: when the Conservatives caused the problem and the Liberals haven't fixed it, what we actually need is a different approach. And that's why the NDP's more comprehensive.
Mr. Scheer, the rates of auto thefts did start going up after 2015.
The five worst years for auto thefts in the last 15 were all under the Harper government.
You can look at the late 90s and then went down in the early 2000s.
It's the 5 worst, and you can look it up. And Andrew knows this, actually. We went from 476 under the Conservatives. Now the rates are rising again. And that's why we do have to take action. And that's why the NDP has proposed something that is concrete.
Okay.
And we certainly hope that other parliamentarians listen.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I already went way long. Thank you, all three of you, for making time for the discussion. Jennifer O'Connell, Andrew Scheer, and Peter Julian.